Baghdad, 1979. A summer day under the sweltering heat of the Middle Eastern sun. In a conference hall in Baghdad, hundreds of Ba'ath Party members wait for their new head of state, Saddam Hussein, to speak. Suddenly, Saddam steps up to the podium with a piece of paper in his hand. In the midst of the burning summer, the hall feels as if it has frozen over. Saddam begins to speak slowly, deliberately. He claims to have uncovered a conspiracy against him. Then, one by one, names begin to be read aloud. These names are not the winners of a lottery. They are individuals whose death warrants have just been signed. Guards pull each named party member from their seat and drag them outside. Those who remain, unable to understand what is happening, sweat with terror in their chairs. Some, trying to mask their fear and display unswerving loyalty, desperately shout, "Long live Saddam Hussein." Amid the chaos, Saddam strolls calmly around the podium, puffing on his cigar. The men on that list will become the ill-fated souls of the new power shift, facing first brutal interrogations, and then the permanent brand of treason. This gathering, where icy dread and scorching heat converge, will go down in history as the Saddam's Great Purge. Days later, the Iraqi public will watch this chilling spectacle on videocassettes distributed across the country, learning just how ruthless their new leader truly was. But what events led to this purge? How were the stones laid on Saddam's path to power? Born in 1937 in a village near Tikrit, north of Baghdad, Saddam endured a harsh childhood. He lost his father before he was born and was regularly beaten by his stepfather. As a child, he fled the family home and moved to Baghdad to live with his uncle. His political journey began early. Swept up by the currents of Arab nationalism that defined the era, Saddam became intrigued by the Ba'ath Party. By the late 1950s, he had joined the movement and lived a turbulent youth. In 1959, he took part in an attempted assassination of Iraq's leader, General Abdul Karim. When the plot failed, he fled first to Damascus and then to Cairo to avoid capture. In Egypt, Saddam kept close ties with Ba'athist circles, embraced Pan-Arabism more fully, and matured politically. Yet exile would not last forever. Baghdad remained a city where the waters never stilled. In 1963, the Ba'athists seized power through a coup, ending Saddam's years abroad. This victory was short-lived. A counter-coup later that same year toppled the nationalists, and Saddam found himself in prison. Even behind bars, he gathered nationalists around him. His talent for organization was evident even in his 20s. In 1966, he escaped from prison, returning to political life with remarkable speed. His meteoric rise began soon afterward. In July 1968, the Ba'ath Party, led by his cousin, General Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr, executed yet another coup. Al-Bakr became president, and 31-year-old Saddam Hussein was appointed vice chairman of the Revolutionary Command Council. As Iraq entered the 1970s, the Ba'ath leadership was preparing to launch a period of economic and social advancement. In June 1972, under Saddam's initiative, a decision was taken that Iraqi oil would now belong to the Iraqi people. Until then, the Iraq Petroleum Company, controlled by British, French, and American interests, owned most of the oil extracted in the country. Iraq itself received only a small share of the profits. The process culminated on the 1st of June 1972, when the Iraq Petroleum Company was nationalized. With this decision, oil production and export came fully under the control of the Baghdad government. The surge in oil revenues and the new development programs rapidly increased literacy among the population. Saddam, one of the architects of this modernization drive, received considerable praise, even earning an award from UNESCO for the compulsory literacy campaign. Yet behind the scenes, things were far less bright. Saddam's hunger for power grew day by day. Outwardly, he appeared to be a loyal deputy to President al-Bakr. But in reality, he was consolidating his power by placing trusted allies in key positions within the security apparatus and the party. In a country accustomed to coups and counter-coups, internal threats were particularly dangerous for the Ba'ath movement. Saddam's solution was clear. To counter any potential discontent or plotting within the army, he brought in a balancing force from within the party itself. By creating his own militia, the so-called People's Army, Saddam ensured his security. Although clashes with groups such as the Kurds and the Communists continued, Saddam's standing in domestic politics grew stronger with each passing year. As the internal power struggle intensified, the Ba'ath Party also faced major tensions in regional politics. The Ba'ath movement was, in principle, an Arab nationalist organization that held power in both Syria and Iraq. But from the 1960s onward, the Syrian and Iraqi Ba'ath parties had become rival factions. By the late 1970s, an implicit power struggle was underway between Saddam Hussein and Syrian President Hafez al-Assad, each cloaking their ambitions in the rhetoric of pan-Arabism. Although both states opposed the Egypt-Israel peace process, mutual distrust ran deep. In 1978, Iraq and Syria held talks on the possibility of unifying their parties and perhaps even their states. Yet he imposed a condition: the Ba'ath Party would have to merge under a single umbrella with Baghdad as its center, and Michel Aflaq, one of the party's founders, would have to lead the unified movement. In essence, Saddam was attempting to seize leadership of the Ba'ath cause. Hafez al-Assad refused full union with Iraq, especially the idea of placing both armies under a single command, and rejected Saddam's terms. The collapse of the unity talks deepened the hostility between the two Ba'ath regimes. Saddam grew increasingly suspicious that the Syrian government was trying to exert influence inside Iraq by cultivating sympathizers. Saddam Hussein, driven by his own ambition and by the Ba'ath movement's internal schism, developed a deepening sense of paranoia. By 1979, President Ahmad Hassan al-Bakr was becoming frail and suffering from severe health problems. After a heart attack in 1976, he had already transferred many of his powers to Saddam. Although al-Bakr remained the leader on paper, the de facto control of the state rested with Saddam Hussein. He now stood one step away from the position he had long awaited. On the 16th of July 1979, at a meeting of the Revolutionary Command Council in Baghdad, al-Bakr announced his resignation and declared that he was handing the presidency over to Saddam Hussein. The official pretext was al-Bakr's health, but many believed the real reason was a coup engineered by Saddam. During the meeting, Saddam sat with the satisfaction of a man finally claiming the seat he had long coveted. But at that very moment, Revolutionary Command Council member and Ba'ath Party secretary Muhi Abdul Hussein Mashedi took the floor. He suggested that al-Bakr should not resign outright, but instead merely take leave, arguing that a full transfer of power was not yet necessary. He would pay dearly, tragically, for this advice. A high-ranking party figure had dared to openly question Saddam's leadership. For Saddam, this was nothing less than a threat to his authority and his plans. From that moment on, he resolved to eliminate anyone within the party who might show even the slightest hint of disloyalty. The list of those who would soon be branded as traitors was beginning to form in his mind. Just 6 days after assuming the presidency, on the 22nd of July 1979, Saddam Hussein convened an extraordinary session of the top ranks of the Iraqi Ba'ath Party. Hundreds of party members gathered in the Baghdad conference hall to greet their new leader. At the start of the meeting, on Saddam's orders, a camera began recording. The entire session was to be filmed. The official agenda was vague. No one could foresee the scenes of horror that would unfold only minutes later. Saddam walked to the podium and, with a cold and composed expression, declared that the Syrian-backed traitorous faction within the party had been uncovered. He then summoned Mashhedi to the podium. Mashhedi suddenly began to confess his own treason in a trembling voice. He claimed that since 1975, with the support of Syrian intelligence, he had formed a clandestine clique within the party and conspired against comrade Saddam. As Mashhedi spoke, the hall seemed to freeze. Worse still, he began listing the names of his alleged accomplices one by one. Everyone in the room held their breath, fixated on the next name to leave Mashhedi's lips. But were Mashhedi's words true? And why would such a powerful figure take part in such a staged spectacle? A few days earlier, he had been tortured by Saddam's security forces. He was given two choices. Either he would stand at the podium and confess to the conspiracy, or terrible things would happen to his wife and children. For Mashhedi, the choice was grim but clear. Mashhedi proceeded to name 68 individuals in rapid succession. Each time a name was spoken, Saddam raised his hand, signaling the guards. Armed security officers immediately seized the identified individual and dragged him out of the hall. The spectacle had a profound psychological effect on the attendees. Colleagues, who had moments earlier been sitting beside them, people they had worked with for years, were being removed one by one, branded as traitors. Everyone waited in petrified silence, afraid that their own name might be next. Some delegates, desperate to demonstrate their loyalty, began shouting slogans praising their leader. Saddam Hussein, in full command of the performance, watched the unfolding drama with measured calm. According to some accounts, he even shed tears, part of the carefully crafted role he was playing in the face of a supposed conspiracy. When the list was finally exhausted, Saddam turned to those who remained and, as if granting them permission to breathe again, thanked them for their past and future loyalty. Those whose names had not been read were hailed as honorable comrades who had earned the trust of Comrade Saddam. In that moment of relief, having narrowly escaped death, they renewed their pledges of allegiance with fervor. The 68 men dragged from the hall had already seen the gates of hell open before them. Taken straight to a military prison, they faced several days of so-called trials before being collectively convicted of high treason. The judicial process was a mere formality. The verdicts had been decided in advance, and the execution squads were already standing by. In the end, 22 of them, including 5 members of the Revolutionary Command Council, were sentenced to death. Saddam went even further. Party members who had survived the Purge and whose loyalty had been affirmed were handed rifles and ordered to execute the very men with whom they had worked shoulder to shoulder only days earlier. This scene was a terrifying warning to the Iraqi people. Thus, in July 1979, every real or potential element of dissent within the Ba'ath Party was physically eliminated. Most of those branded as traitors, including Mashhedi, were executed by firing squad. Others of lower rank were imprisoned or sent into exile. And Saddam did not stop there. In the days that followed, waves of arrests struck the military and even the business world. Hundreds more were arrested and executed by early August for alleged ties to the conspiracy. Saddam made no effort to conceal this brutality. He presented it to the Iraqi public as a lesson. State television and news agencies proclaimed that the dagger plunged into the heart of the Ba'ath Party had been removed, and that the treacherous plot had been crushed. On the 28th of July 1979, selected footage from the meeting's videotape was broadcast across Iraq. On the 8th of August, the Iraqi news agency formally announced that 21 of the 22 condemned men had been executed by regime. Saddam delivered a balcony speech in Baghdad to a cheering crowd of nearly 50,000 people, triumphantly declaring that the traitors who sought to destroy the state had been given the punishment they deserve. This purge was a decisive turning point in Saddam's rule. Its first and most significant consequence was that Saddam emerged as the unchallenged holder of absolute power, a leader who could order the execution of his own party's top ranks, made it clear that no one in Iraq was beyond his reach. Another major consequence was the near-total collapse of Iraq-Syria relations. Saddam Hussein's accusations directly targeted Syrian President Hafez Assad, transforming long-standing Ba'athist rivalry into open hostility. Syria denied any involvement in the alleged plot, but Saddam continued to blame Assad for orchestrating the conspiracy behind the scenes. The hostility would intensify further with the outbreak of the Iran-Iraq War. Between 1980 and 1988, Assad openly defied Saddam by supporting Iran, an ethnic Persian state, over his Arab neighbor. Saddam, in turn, accused Assad of betraying the Arab cause and worked covertly to weaken Syria. In the aftermath of the Purge, Saddam would go on to rule Iraq with an iron fist for the next 24 years. Until his downfall in 2003, he remained the uncontested master of the country.